Hello and welcome to the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. Our leading solicitors share their views on latest legal issues and developments, and how the law might affect you, because we care about righting wrongs and providing first-class personal legal services. So please enjoy this, the London Legal Podcast, presented by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the London Legal Podcast. My name is Stuart Miles and I work here at Hodge, Jones and Allen in the Property Disputes team. The London Legal Podcast is a series that looks at a wide range of legal issues that Londoners may have at some point in their lives. My colleagues Chun Wong and Claire Kitchen have previously discussed what must be considered when you purchase a property. Today, my colleague Michael Kilbane and I will be looking at what can go wrong with a property you have purchased and what initial steps you can take to attempt to resolve any animosity with other parties. So my background is I have been at Hodge, Jones and Allen for about 3 years now. I work in the dispute resolution team and my work focuses on property dispute work. In particular, I have quite an interest in leasehold disputes, which will come in handy for this particular podcast, as this is what we're going to focus on today. So, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself and speak about your experience today?
I've been in private practice now for some 18 years. My background is in dispute resolution and property dispute work. My property dispute practice has seen me cover cases in the first tier tribunal, the property chamber, along with cases in the county court and indeed the high court. And as I say, I've covered quite a range of property disputes over the years. And I'm probably like you, Stuart, with a fair range of freeholder and leaseholder disputes. So moving on very swiftly, I guess, Stuart, can you give us an idea perhaps of what sort of things can go wrong with a property after you've bought it?
Yes, certainly. So from my experience of working in this area, I've seen quite a few disputes which can get quite technical and quite emotive. So as I'm sure you know, Michael, London has a lot of leasehold properties, and the fact that they are leasehold in nature can add to the complications when dealing with property disputes. So I've seen disputes ranging from neighbours who are annoying each other and creating nuisances, and also disputes where neighbours fall out over alterations that have been done to properties.
So I guess taking each of those in turn, when it comes to nuisances between neighbours, what generally, in terms of the cases you run, Stuart, do you tend to come across?
Well, imagine a situation where you're peacefully living in your flat and then all of a sudden your upstairs neighbour decides to rip up their carpet, and then that starts to amplify the sound in your property. That can obviously be extremely annoying to you.
Yeah, so actually just taking out a carpet of itself, would you say that that can cause problems? And you found that within some of your own cases, have you, yes?
Yes, certainly. The complaints I get from clients are that it's just amplifying the noise and it's creating a real disturbance to their everyday lives, particularly during the pandemic where people have been working from home. There seems to be an increase in these types of cases and disputes coming to me.
So just using that as an example with regard to somebody lifting up carpets and just having a wooden floor in there or some kind of non-insulated flooring, what could somebody do about it if it's, creating very high levels of noise nuisance to them?
Well, I know this is probably stating the obvious, but the good first thing to do is to approach your neighbour in a calm manner and obviously discuss the impact it's having on your day-to-day life and seeing if you can just address it with your neighbour directly. That can sometimes bring about a successful resolution at an early stage.
So you would say that at a very early outset, you should try and resolve it with the neighbour and maybe just have an informal chat with them, yes?
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
But I suppose there are instances, and we've probably both come across it, where neighbour isn't actually going to play ball and sometimes, sadly, doesn't respond, in a neighbourly fashion. So after that, what would you generally advise?
Yes, so you can explore a few options here, but maybe you might want to try approaching the local council's environmental health team to complain about the noise. Usually, though, in the scenario we're discussing at the moment, i.e. the lack of carpet, it's unlikely that they're going to take action for this. It's usually much more severe disturbances that provoke a response from the environmental health teams. So, yes, I doubt it's going to be useful, but it's worth a try in first instance.
Of course, with the neighbour, you'd probably need to be sure they are indeed the actual owner of the property, or possibly are they simply renting the property from the actual owner? How would you generally go about finding out in what way they actually are occupying the property, whether as owner or as tenants?
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. Obviously, the person that's disturbing you might not actually own the property, so they could simply be renting from someone and have it on a sublet, a tenancy agreement. So the first thing I would probably do is I'd go on the HM Land Registry website and search for the property where the disturbance is coming from on their database and purchase what's known as the office copy entry for that particular property. And this can be downloaded from the Land Registry website for a nominal fee of £3. They're publicly available records as well, so you don't actually have to be a solicitor to access these documents. And when you actually download the document, sometimes on the actual ownership register, there's the section that tells you who the owner is. And if it's not the person that's creating the noise nuisance, then it will probably be a case that that person that is annoying you is therefore renting the property from the actual landlord. And looking on the property register, there sometimes will be a correspondence address which will identify where the actual landlord, i.e. the owner of the property itself, lives. And in which case you could try writing to them to find out and let them know about the situation and say how the tenants are disturbing you.
So getting the office copies from the Land Registry obviously gives everyone a clue as to who truly owns the property. But of course, you probably come across it in cases as well, Stuart, that some landlords just don't want to get involved in any kind of dispute because, of course, they just want to get as much money out of the property in terms of rent. So if that's the case, and you're not getting anywhere, what could you possibly do next?
Yes, as you say, Michael, some landlords just care about getting the money. And if you can't approach them in respect of warning them how their assets is perhaps deteriorating due to the behaviour of their tenants, then you're probably best bypassing the landlord of the tenants and going direct to the landlord's landlord, which is sometimes known as the freeholder, someone who owns the actual land that the building's built on. So they would be a good idea to approach them. Or alternatively, there may be a management company that's charged with the function of actually looking after the building as well. You'd find this out, and this takes us back nicely to the point that I raised earlier about going on the Land Registry website. You can sometimes get copies of leases as well, and they will detail there's a management company in the lease who you can approach, you have to look after the building. Or you can buy from the Land Registry website the actual freehold title as well, and that will sometimes reveal the freeholder. Now, this is where it's important to then consider if there's any terms in the lease which may be able to assist as well.
Because would you generally agree, Stuart, and I've tended to find it, that usually in any lease, there's usually some kind of clause which provides for flooring, but also in conjunction with that, a clause relating to nuisance, yes?
Yes, exactly. They're two good clauses to look for. Yeah, you're right, Michael. I would definitely go looking for them. It may be that there's a duty to keep carpet down, and that's the type of clause you should be looking for.
So worth checking with the Land Registry, worth checking the lease. And I suppose then if you've tried all the approaches to the landlord and the managing agent and the freeholder, if none of those avenues would work, generally, what would you say to someone? Would it be then to take advice from a property dispute lawyer?
Yes, approach a solicitor. I think you've exhausted all your options and you've got to take it legal, unfortunately.
So what about the scenario, for example, if you've come across a neighbour who's carrying out alterations and they, decide to build an extension, which seems to be quite commonplace in London, particularly on the top of a roof? What would be the situation there?
Again, approaching the local council may be handy here because you could try approaching building control or the planning department and making inquiries as to whether or not those alterations have actually complied with building control regulations, or if the alterations have actual planning approval to be done.
In terms of preliminary steps that someone can take, I generally suggest to them that they check to see whether that local authority has some kind of online portal. Is that something that you would recommend?
Yes, certainly. I'd go online. Most local councils keep history for each property, planning applications that have been approved, made and even refused. Yes, that's a very good point, Michael.
So generally speaking, in terms of these types of property disputes, would you say that communicating all the time is really key and very important?
Yes, certainly. Keep open good communication channels at all times, really. It's the best way to resolve a dispute early, and it can avoid incurring unnecessary expensive costs.
And then, for example, when involving a lawyer, generally, what would you advise?
Well, you may want to check any of your insurance policy documents to see if you have any legal expenses insurance to be able to pay for the advice, because funding a claim can be expensive, and sometimes people will find on their home and contents insurance or car insurance that they actually do have the ability to claim on their insurance for legal advice. And if you're struggling to understand the documents, then you could even try calling your insurance provider to see if you actually have legal expenses insurance available to you.
So worth checking to see if you've got that kind of cover, because presumably then you avoid paying privately, perhaps.
Yes, because if you don't have any way of paying via insurance, then unfortunately, yes, you'd probably have to pay on a private retainer.
Thanks, Stuart. I mean, obviously, we've covered a little bit of territory there about preliminary steps to be taken when there's nuisance going on. And I suppose you probably agree with me that most people, when they invest in their home, it's probably the most major investment that they will make in their lifetime. So if disputes like this occur and they want to continue having quiet enjoyment of their property without any problems, it's best to see if any dispute can be resolved very quickly and amicably between themselves. But obviously, we'd probably say that if it escalates in any way, getting some solid legal advice from a specialist property dispute lawyer who can advise on next best steps and actually try and de-escalate the situation and cool things down is probably going to save an awful lot of money and time and hassle in the long run. Thank you, everyone. That concludes this particular episode of the London Legal Podcast. Stuart and I hope that you found it in some ways useful and informative. It goes without saying, if you want to learn any more about property disputes and how we here at Hodge, Jones and Allen can help, please do take a look at our website. We have quite a few property dispute lawyers, very capable of helping you, and you'll see the link to our website below.
Thank you for listening to the London Legal Podcast, presented to you by Hodge, Jones and Allen Solicitors. To listen to more podcasts, follow us on SoundCloud or visit our website www.hja.net for interesting opinions and the latest legal information. Or if you need our help, call 0808 2780 216.